Okay, let's see what happens. Add a title.
Way to go.
Word of Torah. That's our title.
Someone need to mute. There's some noise going on in the background.
When they come here to what?
All right. Are we live to Facebook? I think we are. We are live to Facebook right now. So, hello. Hello to anyone watching on Facebook. We're trying something new this week. If you are watching and you want to join in the conversation, you're welcome to add a comment on the Facebook page and we will try and engage with it. So this week we are reading Parashiot Tazria-Metzora, the double portion. And every Devar Torah that I have looked at or read this week, and there are dozens of them coming out with everyone sitting at home and being on a computer all the time, every single one makes the point, and the point that we're going to make here as well, that Tazria-Metzora is generally speaking one of the Torah portions that is least accessible in our lives. It is a portion about Tzara'at, which is often translated as leprosy, but it's really something completely different, and the rituals around how our ancestors dealt with it, how they diagnosed it, how they treated it, how they responded to it. And in our lives today, Tzara'at is not a concern. We're not even sure exactly what this disease was. And so it is definitely outside of our frame of reference. And it feels incredibly irrelevant to modern life most of the time. This week, as we are living in the midst of the sheltering at home and staying away from one another and social distancing and all of the things that we're doing, and as we're dealing with this disease of COVID-19, suddenly this is, as several people have put it, the year for Tazria-Metzora. This year, this portion really does seem to have something more to say. So I want to investigate that and see what it is that we can take from it. So we're going to start at the very beginning. We're going to start at the very beginning. Let me just share my screen with you. All right, Tzara'at in the age of COVID-19. So we're going to start at the beginning of this section of the portion, not the very beginning of the Torah portion itself, but the beginning of chapter 13, where the portion begins. When a person has on the skin of his body a swelling, a rash, or a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection on the skin of his body, it shall be reported to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons the priest. The priest shall examine the affection on the skin of his body. So this is simply setting up the situation. A person is infected with this disease, whatever it is, and then the priest examines, and the priest shall isolate this infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him, and if the affection has remained unchanged in color and the disease has not spread on the skin, the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days. So already there is this connection, at least to my mind, there is this connection between this and our current life, where we are seeing people being isolated and having to be examined, and this is a frightening thing, right? You can get a sense that the uncertainty of what it is going on with this person plays into the role into the response of the priest. And so the first question that we are forced to ask when it comes to Tzara'at is why? Why is a person afflicted with this disease? This is a question the rabbis spend a great deal of time talking about. So any thoughts in general, anything you know from previous learning on this subject?
Being punished, perhaps?
Punished for what?
By God for some sin.
Punished for some sin. Any other thoughts? So it is a punishment. I mean, I think that is definitely a possibility.
Possibly because they came into contact with some impurity that they picked up.
So absolutely. So you're touching on a really important idea, one that we're gonna briefly interact with, the idea of impurity being transferable. And there are different levels of impurity, different levels of tuma. And in this instance, actually, Tzara'at, a person who is a Metzora, who has this disease, has one of the highest levels of impurity. They are able to transfer it to other things. They can transfer it to any objects that they touch, any people that they touch, they would also make impure. It is a very, very serious disease, and one that has implications for anything that the infected person comes into contact with. So it could be, I haven't come across specifically an idea that Tzara'at is something that can be derived that way, but maybe, I mean, as infectious disease goes, right, it could be that if person A has Tzara'at, they come in contact with person B, they would not only become impure, but they would actually become infected in that same way. Any other thoughts as to why this might be? All right. Well, then let's see what the rabbis have to say on the subject. So we look in the Talmud, and Reish Lakish says, this shall be the law of the leper, of the Metzora. And this means that this should be the law of a defamer, a motzi shem ra. So if you look at these two words here, there it is. No, right here. The Metzora and motzi shem ra, you can see that there's a lot of similarity between the words, between the spellings. And so the rabbis will often find in these linguistic connections, and etymologically there's probably no connection here whatsoever, but they find in this connection the explanation for where this disease comes from. So a person who brings forth a bad name, who motzi a shem ra, a bad name, is someone who is afflicted with Metzora. They're afflicted with Tzara'at, and that's the reason for it. So this is the traditional understanding of Tzara'at, is that it is an affliction for a sin, as Joel said. It's an affliction specifically for the sin of gossiping, of Lashon Hara. Barbara, is that a raised hand? You're muted, though.
Now, Shem is also the name of God. So I look at it as saying something bad about God.
That's an interesting perspective I hadn't seen before. I think Hashem really literally just means the name, and is a euphemistic way to refer to God's name without actually saying God's name aloud. So I don't think that that's something that the rabbis are trying to do in this moment, but it is an interesting connection to draw. Absolutely.
What does motzi shem ra mean, like literally each word?
Literally, to bring forth a bad name. Motzi, to bring forth. Shem is name, and ra is bad. So to cause a person to have a bad name. So the source for this is more than simply just the linguistic connection. They actually look also to one of the example in the Torah of when a person is afflicted with Tzara'at, when a person actually has this disease. And that comes later in the Torah, comes in the book of Numbers with Miriam and Aaron. So apropos of seemingly nothing, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman that he had married. Suddenly, the Lord called to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting." And in these ellipses, God scolds them and really yells at them quite significantly. And then at the end, still incensed with them, the Lord departed. As the cloud withdrew from the tent, there was Miriam stuck with snow-white scales. And in the Hebrew, Metzora'at, she is struck with Tzara'at, kasheleg, like the snow. So through this, the rabbis are able to draw the connection. What is it that Miriam did that led her to be afflicted in this way? She brought forth a bad name. She defamed her brother Moses, and seemed to be less concerned with potentially defaming his wife as well. And as a punishment, she was afflicted with Tzara'at. And so if we're wondering why someone else might be afflicted with it, then this is a point to help us understand why.
Did anything happen to Aaron?
No, nothing happened to Aaron. So Aaron, throughout the Torah, really avoids almost any form of punishment. After the golden calf, nothing happens to him. After this, nothing happens to him. In this instance, it would be communally disastrous if Aaron were to be afflicted with Tzara'at. He could no longer function as the high priest. And so it sort of, as a practical thing, would have been really impossible for him to be afflicted in this same way. But he is given no punishment whatsoever for no clear and apparent reason.
I was just going to say, is it significant when you say spoke against somebody? Well, there's Lashon Hara, which is like saying bad things about somebody, but defamation means even more. It's like that the thing is not true. And, you know, if you said somebody was a criminal and in fact they had been convicted of a felony, that is true. But if you said that about them and it wasn't true, that's where defamation comes in.
Right. So yeah, in the modern legal context, that's the case. In the case of halachic law, Lashon Hara would include both of those cases. That anything that negatively impacts someone's reputation can be considered, I mean, unless there's a reason why you have to share this information, right? I'm potentially hiring you as my bookkeeper and you were convicted of embezzlement. That's important information for me to have, right? I'm inviting you over for dinner and you've gotten 15 parking tickets. Doesn't matter. So the relevance and the reason for the defamation matters more in a halachic context than the truth or the falsehood of it.
Interesting.
So actually, and going back to Joel's point about Miriam and Aaron, one of the reasons that the rabbis try to explain, to try and understand why Miriam is punished and not Aaron, actually is right here. Oh, not right here, right? Why is this not working? Right here. So this word vatidaber, so even though it says Miriam and Aaron, the word is conjugated in the feminine. So Miriam either is the one who actually does the speaking or at least the one who initiates the conversation. And so as we're trying to understand why she's punished and Aaron is not, this is something to turn to lean on to understand it, that she has some sort of primary role in this moment. It would be conjugated differently if Aaron were the one speaking, or even if they were speaking together in the plural. Somehow it says, and she spoke and Aaron against Moshe, which is an awkward phrase, awkward phrasing in English, but is sort of what the Hebrew is saying. So as we look at this, we are given the rabbinic understanding as to why a person would be afflicted with Tzara'at. And then there's actually at the end of the narrative, as we get to the purification and the return of the individual to the community, we can see perhaps another connection. So at the very end, the priest shall order 2 live clean. This is after the person has been found to be no longer afflicted. The priest shall order 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, crimson stuff, and hyssop to be brought for him who is to be cleansed. The priest shall order one of the birds slaughtered over fresh water in an earthen vessel. He shall take the live bird along with the cedar wood, the crimson stuff, and the hyssop, and dip them together with the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. He shall then sprinkle it several times on him who is to be cleansed of the eruption and cleanse him, and you shall set the live bird free in the open country. So in general, this simply seems like a sacrificial ritual, but Ramban, Nachmanides, in looking at this, actually saw a connection to something else. So Ramban writes, and these are all like the paschal sacrifice offered in Egypt. So if you remember, one of the important things in the final plague is, of course, the blood that's put on the mantle to protect the houses of the Israelites. And so we've got blood here. And how was it put on? It was put on with bunches of hyssop. So the hyssop is dunked in the blood, and that somehow protects us from the death that was coming. And so Ramban doesn't actually dive into this any more deeply. Although if you do look at the website Aleph Beta, Rabbi Foreman, who's put together some very good videos, dives into this connection very, very deeply and sees in the connection between the 10th plague here and the Tzara'at in general, the possibility that it's the nearness to death that is at play here. And it's the possibility of dying that in the narrative of Moses and Aaron and Miriam, Aaron is concerned that Miriam is like one who is dead. And that's what he says to Moses when pleading for him to ask God to heal her. And so there's the connection, the blurring of the line between living and dead is potentially one of the things at play here. So all of these are attempts by the rabbis to understand this situation, to understand why a person would have been afflicted with it. And that's something that as we live in this world of coronavirus and of infection and of communal infection, communal passing, that is often in our minds. Why did this person get infected? And usually it's a practical question. What did they do? Where did it come from? Because if we can understand what they were doing and where they were, where they got it, we can avoid that. We can avoid that location or that activity in some way. But there's also there can be a tendency for us to also assign responsibility. Why did they do this? What were they doing that was so irresponsible that would lead them to be afflicted with COVID-19? And I think actually that's where the connection between Tzara'at and coronavirus can actually be very, very dangerous, because we shouldn't follow in the footsteps of the rabbis trying to assign blame and to say that this was deserved for some reason, for some sin. The rabbis, keep in mind, were not dealing with a disease that was active in their communities or active in their lives. Tzara'at was a historical thing, something that the Torah discussed, but that was not actually afflicting anyone in their community. And so they could talk about it as a punishment for sin without the concern that there would be this neighbor down their street who is afflicted with it, who they now have just said has committed these awful sins, whatever they might be. And so we should keep that in mind as we engage and be careful as we draw any connections or try to learn any lessons from the Torah's discussion of Tzara'at and connecting it to COVID-19. So the question of why here is not one that we ought to find in the Torah. The Torah and its discussion of Tzara'at is useful, but not for understanding why. Instead, perhaps we can turn to how did the rabbis treat this disease? How did the Torah and the priests treat it? How did they handle it? And perhaps that can educate us in some way. So already we've seen the priest shall examine the individual, and this teaches us the importance of consulting with an expert. The priest shall isolate this afflicted person for 7 days, and this is, surprisingly and satisfyingly exactly the 2-week period that medical professionals have told us is the appropriate amount of time to stay isolated to be sure that you are not infected with COVID-19. And if we look later in the chapter, we can see some other connections as well, some other pieces of treatment and of handling that do have parallels to our current situation. Joel, you're muted though.
Going back to the previous slide, it's interesting that the expert is
A priest.
a priest, not a medical professional. I don't know, in those days they had the equivalent of some sort of medical person who was deemed the doctor.
There was no infectious disease school in the Sinai Desert. But no, I think you're raising an important point, and actually one that is not only just practical, right? There were no medical experts, I think, in the community at the time, so the priests were perhaps the most educated individuals. But I think also what you're pointing to draws an important lesson for us, that the Torah is not concerned with this necessarily from a medical perspective, but it's concerned with it from a different angle, from an angle of purity and impurity in community.
Right, by automatically making a priest the expert, it implies there was some religious element to the disease, not a medical element to the disease, which leads to, oh, they were punished for some sin of gossip or whatever, even though it may have nothing to do with it.
No, that's a really good point. Yes, I think that does. That puts it into the realm of religion, and it puts it into the realm of also, I mean, not that this is the only way that sacrifices were offered, but puts it into the realm of potentially sin and then a sin offering. Absolutely.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Is the priest taking care of this person the way a doctor would take care of a patient? Or is the priest trying to protect the rest of the community?
It's a great question. So what we see is the priest examines the person. If the person is clearly not afflicted, they say, you're not afflicted, you're okay. If the person is clearly infected, they say, you're infected. We're going to see this in a moment. You're infected and you need to leave the camp and the community and isolate. And if it's an in-between, an uncertain case, then they make the person go into this 7-day up to 14-day quarantine to determine what needs to happen. At that point, they will actually check in with the person to just, not even really to see how they're doing, but to see if they've recovered, right? The priest is the one who then also has to pronounce them cured once they finally are over this illness. So there's no active treatment being discussed by the priest. There's no taking care of them, but is there concern the community or the individual? In some ways, it actually seems like it's more the community, because the primary thing that they're able to do is to, first of all, remove them from the community so that it doesn't spread, and then to facilitate the ritual of readmitting them into the community once they are cured. So it does seem, this is a good point, it does seem that the community and its survival and its status is the primary concern for the priest. But that might also be, going back to Joel's point, simply because that's the area that the priest is, that's their expertise, that's what they do. They aren't a medical doctor to be able to treat.
It's also interesting if they believe that the reason the person got the, I forget the Hebrew, whatever the Hebrew word is, sorry, the leprosy, is because they committed a specific sin. If I didn't commit that sin, why should I get infected?
Yeah, I mean, I think
they're sort of dancing around the whole, again, sort of the medical elements of this.
Yes, and you know, to me, it's really important actually that the Torah does not ever describe this as a punishment. It doesn't describe this as a plague. It doesn't mention a sin that an individual committed at any point in the entire narrative. All the instruction that never comes out. So, for the most part, it is a later rabbinic onlay onto it to say that this is the punishment for sin. But your point that the priest, that's sort of the priest's area of responsibility and of expertise. And so once you call them in, it forces us, it leads us automatically to put this in that framework is a good one. Yeah.
But doesn't the fact that it's right after Miriam and Aaron's, say that to Moses, and God scolds them that she gets these snow flakes or whatever, doesn't that imply that it is a punishment?
So it doesn't come right after. That's actually in the next book of the Torah entirely. That comes in the book of Numbers. So there's a great deal of separation. This is the theoretical instruction here, and that's just the one instance where it does take place. But the obvious connection that you draw there, right, as you read it, regardless of the distance, in chapters of the Torah, is that it is a punishment, or at least it can be used as a punishment when that is appropriate. Absolutely. So I want to move forward and look at the ritual of what happens when a person is definitively diagnosed. So their clothes are to be rent. His head should be left bare, and he shall cover over his upper lip, and he shall call out, unclean, unclean. He shall be unclean as long as the disease is on him. Being unclean, he shall dwell apart. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So there are several pieces of this that are I think, in close parallel to the way that we are leading our lives and the things that happen right now. As a separate issue, though, there's a comment in the Talmud that I think is something for us to keep in mind right now. And I want to thank my friend Dr. Rachel Rosenthal who reminded me of this passage in the Talmud. So looking at this, and he shall cry, impure, impure. They must inform the public of their distress, and the public will pray for mercy on their behalf. So when a person is definitively diagnosed with Tzara'at, they need to go out and cry out impure. And the rabbis say, well, okay, that makes sense. Again, if we're concerned with the status of the community, and if that's what the priest is most concerned with, then it makes sense for the sake of the community for us to know to stay away from this person as they walk through the camp, right? They need to call out impure. But the rabbis say, well, he calls out impure 2 times. 1 time would be enough. So this is an unnecessary extra cry. And what's that extra cry for? It's to remind the community of everyone else's obligation to pray on their behalf that they be cured and that they recover completely. And as we are living in a world where individuals and people in our lives are afflicted with this disease, it's important for us to remember our obligations to them, our obligations to help care for them, our obligations to help heal them as much as we can, and simply also our obligation to pray on their behalf, to keep them in our minds and in our thoughts and in our prayers, so that they never get the sense that they are abandoned, even as we are in this social isolation and this state of quarantine. So in this passage, though, I want to look at the parallels that we have here. So we have covering your upper lip, wearing a mask. Dwelling apart is the social distancing that we're all living through. And this idea that we were talking about a moment ago of the contamination of objects, and that it can be passed from one thing to another, and the concern about a disease getting into an object which can then impact a person. And so all of this to me is interesting. It is compelling, the idea that the way that we are handling this has precedent going back through history, that quarantine and separation is the necessary and important way for us to try and protect ourselves, our community, and also our individuals, right? The people who are most at risk, that we need to take all of these steps. But at the same time, we need to be sure that we're not using the Torah as our medical instruction guide. This is an interesting parallel, but shouldn't determine exactly what we do. We should, again, rely on the medical experts for that. So we have determined that we should not be looking for why people are afflicted with this disease, not look to Tzara'at to help us understand that. We can find parallels about how the 2 illnesses are handled and how they're treated, but we shouldn't learn one from the other. And so where that leaves us, I think, is how we should respond when the danger has passed. when a person is recovered, when a person comes through this, and someday in the future, when we are all able to return to our lives and to community. So this is the passage that I want to end with. The priest shall order 2 lives, we've already read this, 2 live clean birds, this is the cedar with the crimson stuff, the hyssop, to be brought to him who is to be cleansed. One of the birds needs to be slaughtered over fresh water in an earthen vessel, and he shall take the live bird, along with the cedar wood, the crimson stuff, and the hyssop, and dip them together with the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water, sprinkles it 7 times, and then you set the live bird free in the open country. And I think if we focus really in on these 2 birds, we can come to an important lesson and an important understanding of what is happening here. Because these 2 birds were randomly chosen, right? Any 2 birds could have worked. And once the 2 birds were chosen, again, it was randomly done to kill one and to set the other one free. And so we can think of ourselves really as connected to that one bird that was set free, that we came so very close to death. We came so very close to losing everything, and we're touched by it. That one live bird has been dipped in the blood of the other one. We've been touched, we've been affected, we've been shaped by all that we're going through, and then we will one day be set free. And so thinking about these 2 birds, there is a sense of intense gratitude, first of all, that one bird we could imagine, we can impose on it that it feels of having survived, right? That it by chance made it through this difficult time. But at the same time, how close we came, how close everything came to not ending this way, that there, but for the grace of God, this one bird could have been switched. And the connection that I see here is to the other place in the Torah where we have 2 animals, one which is slaughtered and one which is set free. And this is the narrative of the scapegoat of the Yom Kippur ritual that actually we'll read about next week. Aaron takes 2 goats and let them stand before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he shall place lots upon the 2 goats, one marked for the Lord and the other for Azazel. And based on this explicit moment of chance, one goat is slaughtered and the other goat is sent out into the wilderness, potentially to survive. And so in the context of Yom Kippur, it's a way for us to understand the chance that does exist in our lives. And in connecting it back to the birds and to the Tzara'at, it also speaks to the chance that one person is afflicted and another person is spared, that one person recovers and another person doesn't, that it's not anything deterministic. It's not anything coming from what we do or what we don't do, but there is simply this possibility, this real fear. And it makes the uncertainty all the more difficult, and the realization that there's very little that we can do to be absolutely certain that we will be safe, especially as we're learning that this disease has been much more widespread in our community than we realized up until now. But also just that what happens to a person when they've been infected with it is, again, sometimes it goes one way and sometimes it goes the other. And so as we come out of the other side of this, whenever we do come out the other side of this, I think that sense of gratitude and of survival and of how close we came is one that we need to hold on to. We need to appreciate that we made it and not feel in any way like we were the ones who deserved to come out to the other side, but rather that we were lucky and that we have a responsibility to care for one another from that perspective. That as we know individuals who are affected by this, individuals who have suffered loss because of this, that we have a responsibility to help them, because it could so easily be, could it have so easily been, and could still so easily be that we are in their position. And so we need to act on that reality and care for one another and be grateful for the health and the safety that we do experience now and that we will hopefully continue to experience into the future. So this is the moment of Tzara'at and how I can draw a connection from it to this modern time. Definitely not to try and understand why people are infected. Definitely not trying to understand how I should deal with it in the moment, but how I should frame it moving forward in my life. I think the Torah has a great deal of wisdom for us. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Shabbat shalom.
All right, Shabbat Shalom. We will be back at 5:30 for Kabbalat Shabbat. And then I wish you all a very good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Yeah.